what I consider the larger clusters which constitute environmental degradation. And these are land degradation, degradation of water quality and accessibility, environmental pollution, the loss of wildlife habitats and biological diversity, and the deteriorating aquatic systems, deforestation, and then climate change, which is a multiplier of the problems that these environmental concerns present. Land degradation has been addressed, I think, extensively by the Vice President. And it's important, it's critical when we consider that 61% of Tanzania is considered degraded, meaning the productivity of land is declining just when populations are increasing. So it is a critical issue. The issue of accessibility of to water and degradation of water quality is important. It has been estimated that poor sanitation and hygiene cost the country about $206 million per year, which is an equivalent of 1% of the annual GDP. Environmental pollution, it is also reported that 60 to 80% of the reported cases of diseases are caused by environmental pollution in this country. And that means a great deal of loss. We will go into the measures and response measures, I think, in the framework of the time that will be provided in the question and answer. And then deterioration of the loss of wildlife habitats and biological diversity. This is another measure and another issue that requires quite a great deal of focus. It has been reported that we lose 10,000 elephants annually, which is equivalent of 12.5% of the total elephant population in the country. As we lose the habitats, we also lose biological diversity. You know that Tanzania is high on the scale of global significance because of its endemic species that cannot be found elsewhere except in Tanzania. So the degradation of habitats is keenly connected to biological diversity. We have reports that the Mara River has decreased by 68% in its dry season flow since 1972. And Kilombero Rufiji rivers have decreased by 8% since that time. And these are issues that are of great concern in a country whose economic development is tightly connected to environmental resources and livelihoods of people. And then deforestation, which has been spoken intensely by the Vice President and other speakers. And then we have emerging issues, and I won't get into that because my time is over. I'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Actually, I let you exceed a little bit of time because you were highlighting some of those climate environmental clusters. Now, without repeating what has been discussed, I would invite you to add up to your 3 minutes, and then we'll come back on those issues that have been raised. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. So I'll basically try to spice up what others have spoken. The disadvantage of being last but one speaker, and unfortunately, Professor will be the last in the row, is that most of the important issues will be covered by your preceding speakers. So basically, if we want to understand clearly how important the environment is, let's echo back on the nature of our economy and understand the fact that the Tanzania economy is so much dependent on natural resources. If you look at the contribution of the GDP, you realize that 40% of our economy is made of services, 27% from industry and manufacturing, and 24% from agriculture, forestry, and fishery. So if you want to understand whether we will prosper or develop under the current era of environmental degradation, let's try to link the recently explained the environmental degradation aspects with our key driving sectors of the economy. So while 40% of our economy comes from the service, 13% of which from the tourism, we have already recorded that Tanzania is on 12th position globally in terms of the species that are almost running extinct. So we are depleting our wildlife at a faster rate than most of the countries globally already. If we are hoping tourism to continue to be the driver of our economy and the service industry at large, we need to change what we do on this area. While we are working so hard towards industrialization and the construction sector, and 70% of the construction inputs come from the forestry, already Tanzania is ranked the 5th globally in terms of deforestation. So this is how we want to see the numbers. If should we get so much worried now? I think we are not yet there to be super worried, but something needs to be not now than later. Because 50% of our land is covered by forests, 90% of which is woodland. So we still have hopes to do something, but not with the current pace. When you look at the 5-year development plan 2, which articulates our development agenda over the next 5 years since 2016 to 2021, we claim that we will be afforesting at the rate of 130,000 acres a year. Already we're deforesting almost 400 acres every year, mainly to meet charcoal demands and to clear land for agriculture. So we are degrading 400,000 acres, and we put in our national plan that we'll be planting 130,000 acres. That's a very huge mismatch. And my point here is that we are not so much to worry in the sense that we are running out of the forest, but if we continue with the current pace, our good numbers of growth that we are observing currently will switch back. Look at the agricultural sector that employs 80% of the population. Previous speakers have already spoken about the degradation. Actually, 2/3 of the land is degraded. And this is translating to what we are seeing now. The agriculture is growing by less than 3%, but we are seeing the population growth of more than 5% now. So we are hoping to see even more pressure on the land if business as usual continues. So what I want to bring on board here for the discussion and for all of us to pick up is that we are in this stage where we need to sit back and look ourselves where we are heading. We have very nice Environmental Management Act and a lot of regulations in place, but if we do not work hard to implement and execute them, probably things might not be as good as we envision in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Remedios. Now I would like to invite Professor Mheshimiwa Nomad.
Yes,
thank you.
Yes, just taking from what my colleagues just ended, I would say, okay, the question is, can Tanzania develop with the current environmental degradation? The answer is yes, if we fix some of the issues. Now, taking from what my colleague just finished, I would say that, of course, most of the issues that we want to fix regarding environmental degradation needs competence-based recruitment, appointment, and promotion in terms of personnel. In this regard, if we want to manage environment, because anything that we do, of course, has to do with the environment. It has to do with environment. Now, how are we going to fix all these issues? We got to have in place competent personnel. In this regard, from the appointing authorities, they should be sensitive in terms of the placement. When you do recruitment, ensure that, of course, you do it through competence-based mode. When you do promotion, do it in the competence-based mode. Appointment, so it has to observe competence-based criteria. Why is this important? Because when you do have good policy, good law, as we do have, and you miss the point of competent personnel, for sure, you're going to fail before starting the road. You're going to fail, and you will finally fail because of lack of competent personnel. For we, of course, professionals of governance and public administration, we consider that competence-based promotion and recruitment is key in every venture of development. In every venture of development. How do you come up with good policies of environment? How do you come up with good policies of or strategies of environmental protection and conservation? It's unless you have competent personnel. That's why we are saying it's important, really, if Tanzania wants, for instance, to foster or to orchestrate development in a proper manner, we must have proper personnel in every venture. I understand, for instance, developing countries, including Tanzania, we are engaged into sort of spearheading projects that are meant to develop our countries. But again, can I say yes to a no project? If I'm weak, I cannot say so, unless I do not compromise my quality, my value, with what I believe. So in this regard, it's important that for the government, for we, to the entire society, we must ensure that we indulge into competence-based recruitment, promotion, and appointment if we want to manage the environment. Thank you.
Very much. Talking of competence, employment, and the personnel, I would like to just ask you to pick up on that. What action would you recommend as a politician for members of parliament and politicians in general, community leaders and other opinion leaders for strengthening environmental governance and its implementation, apart from the personnel and administration?
Thank you so much. Number one, I would say is for electors. When we do elections, because politicians, as you have put your questions, simply refer to those who are elected by the people for the people. That's first card of politician. Elected by the people, and they have to do for the people. Now, number one, the role is for electors. Electors must elect based on competence, not otherwise. Electors. When we contest for seats of parliament, presidents, councillors, for electors must elect us because we are competent to execute those posts. That's number one. Number two, for those elected now, including me, we must ensure that, of course, we do not compromise the benefits of the society vis-a-vis our personal wishes. We must ensure that whichever we decide, whatever we do, has to be linked with developing our people. That's number two. Now, for opinion leaders, as you have made it, for opinion leaders, NGOs, civil societies, other groups, again, leaders must be elected. If at all, you expound them and you realize that they can actually do for the people, not otherwise. This is imperative. Because short of that, then we cannot actually achieve what we expect to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was expecting to hear a little more on, do we have champions, of environmental champions in the parliament? But then maybe we can discuss that later. I would like Mr. Eric Mugurusi to really pick up on the issue of environmental degradation, the policies and regulations that are in place. Are there gaps? What needs to be filled? And taking into account the challenges of climate change right now. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I I think there are two approaches. Taking into consideration the context of climate change, the adverse impacts of climate change. One is adaptation, because we have to adapt to a changing climate. We do not cause the adverse impacts of climate change. We contribute minimally, but we suffer the most if we do not adapt. So adaptation is critical, it's survival, and that means adapting, mainstreaming climate change in all the sectors that are important. And they're mentioned in the National Climate Change Strategy of Tanzania, as well as the National Climate Change Strategy of Zanzibar. They're itemized. So it's important, without getting into the nitty-gritty of that, the approach is adaptation. The second approach is low carbon development pathway. There are many linked objectives between low carbon and sustainable development objectives in the context of our national strategy for growth and poverty reduction. And so we need to focus in the area of minimizing greenhouse gas emissions. We have the energy sector. We need to focus on cleaner fossil technologies because the low carbon development strategy depends on the natural resources you have. But we can turn that problem of global warming into an advantage, and the ambassador told us about global cooperation. And we can then tap into the global climate finance by focusing on areas that can bring development. Invest in infrastructure. It is expensive to relocate infrastructure once it is constructed. So we must invest now to address the challenges of tomorrow. Infrastructure is an important area. In agriculture, intensification of agricultural, smart agriculture, climate-sensitive agriculture. And I must say, Mr. Mbeo, that having worked in government, government works together. Already in the Ministry of Agriculture, as I know, there is an agricultural climate resilience plan and many other actions that have been taken. And so government is not working separately, that I can say for sure. And there are also transition technologies, renewable energies that can raise us from where we are to improve the energy access. And then these taken together, the mitigation measures taken together, which interact integrally, broadly with other objectives of sustainable development, that should be able to take us through with the support of the international community on agreed objectives.
Thank you very much. Maybe, Mr. Remedios, would you be pleased to add to that, taking into account that Tanzania, we've already enacted, we've passed the protocol Paris Accord, and I assume we have the national determined contributions. So, basing on your area and the economics, what do you think should be done in relation to also sustainable development goals that in relation to the climate and environment in particular? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Having participated in various research work and different policy interaction and reading, I understand that we as a country are very blessed with quite good environmental management policy and regulation. So we have Environmental Management Act, for example, of 2004, which clearly articulates how best we could do our best practices to make sure that we foster development, but while taking care of the environment. But when you look at the EMA, which gave rise to NEMKI, the overseer of most of environmental management practices in the country, has a couple of regulations which are in place already, but there are still a number of regulations which are missing to make the act implementable up to the down level to the LGA level. So we need to finalize tying up the final threads to make sure that our implementers up to the LGA level can clearly supervise and act within the EMA framework. But also, importantly, when we speak to NEMC, who are responsible to making sure that most of our industry investors, for example, and business community and the Tanzanian community at large adhere to different environmental regulations in the country. Sorry, you forgive my voice and frequent coughing. You realize that there is a good spirit from the NEMKI perspective, but they are experiencing a serious challenge when it comes to the human resources, for example, and financial resources on the other hand. While they are short of staff to run environmental impact assessment itself for every project, they have to solicit or outsource external consultants to do that. They are bestowed with a mandate to make sure that they do on-ground auditing. So if a consultant does an environmental impact assessment for a particular investor, it is a role of an NEMKI to go down there and validate what environmental impact assessment report, if it matches with what exactly is on the ground. But that also requires sufficient resources, not only financial, but also human resource. So I think it's a right time now for the country. If we really need to take on board seriously the environmental issues, we need to go beyond a mention in our document. We need to put the institution and framework to adhere to what we speak in the papers. So that's what I would add up to that, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, Waziri, talking of environmental impact assessment, I was from the media and some of these website group, somebody sent me the EIA that I signed when the Dar es Salaam Urban Transport was setting up their headquarters there at Msimbazi. So I looked at it and I thought, was I wrong to sign that EIA? No, because the research was done, and they also exposed and explained some of the mitigation areas that needed to be taken to. So whether we failed to address some of the areas of mitigation or some of the follow-up steps that needed to be taken prior to the implementation, that is another thing. Maybe Professor Agnes, that is your area. Can you say something about that?
Yes,
Thank you.
We do a lot of environmental impact assessment, and we provide the mitigation measures. But I'm always getting to surprise when I see Kange Lugola, the minister, deputy minister, penalizing people because of pollution, because of what, which was really explained in the EIA that it should be mitigated. So I'm seeing really there this implementation failure within the government institutions, and probably this is happening because of the capacity, both the human and the financial resources. So we need really to focus now to build, because now the EIA are complied. All development projects, EIA is done by very competent people. But there is lack of monitoring, and you know EIA mitigation measures is a cost to the developer. And if he knows that NEMC will not come to monitor, he will just go away without implementing them. So the problem now is really monitoring and enforcement. We only go there when we see the problem. But when you go through the EIA, they are very comprehensive. They are very earmarking the issues to address it. But you find the same thing appearing, the pollution, the what. We feel that there is really implementation failure, and we need to build capacity at the government level in terms of human and financial resources.
Thank you very much. Kurugenzi, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I think what I can say is that the issue of monitoring in environmental management is critical, not only for EIA, At the regulatory level, EIA's impact assessments are used typically to mitigate negative externalities. But when we talk of sensitive environmental areas that have to be monitored over time, and so other areas in environmental management, resources are required for monitoring, and I think this is an area where at one time in the Vice President's office we established a system of public expenditure reviews to undertake reviews over time to indicate how much money has actually been going to environment in order to highlight the profile of environment in the budget system. It is an area which requires considerable resources, both human and financial resources. But the government has made so many priorities, and this is why global cooperation is required. Thank you.
No man, Professor.
Yes, you have made it all, Dr. Matilda, dear moderator. That's why I said it is the question of competence. If I may draw attention back to when we were constructing Taylor Dam, by that time, of course, 1982-83, it was meant to act as a reservoir for water. And the government did not take proper measures to ensure that, of course, the catchment of upstairs, including where I hail, Makete district, where River Ruaha, Lumakali, they feed the Mtela Dam. Okay, no measures were taken. And to date, where is Mtela Dam? Are we saying the policies were wrong? Are we saying the AIA were not in place? What we are saying, whoever did it, were they competent enough to stand by what they know? That's number one. But number two, to date, we know for sure, dear colleagues, we know for sure that to date, politicians are becoming better than technocrats, which is fishy. The level of compromise of technocrats is huge compared to politicians. I can stand by what I know. But for a technocrat, a scientist, whom will you expect, he will just say, okay, no, big boss, I can't do this. When you try to evade or to infiltrate knowledge of what you want to happen, he will just say, okay, gosh, I do what you want. So what I'm saying that it's imperative, it's important to know that competence-based recruitment or promotion means being able to stand by the truth, protecting your value at the expense of truth. Do not jeopardize your understanding, your value, because of the wishes of politicians. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Standing on professionalism. So I would like to ask maybe Remedios, and then Agnes will talk a bit. What do you think should be the role of universities, higher institutions, and in addressing environmental challenges, especially as we are moving to industrialization in this area?
Thank you so much. I think universities, being as academia and think tank to most of the countries, our main role is basically to generate knowledge and to make sure that most of our policy are evidence-driven. That's number one role. So we call upon, I think, the policymakers to make sure that, to make use of this academia and think tank, because they are sitting on top of a lot of knowledge, and hundreds of researches are done in our universities, and hundred of them are actually very policy relevant, but they end up being published in peer-reviewed journal for academic satisfaction, and sometimes shelved in our good libraries. But I think, on the other hand, when you look at what is going on the policy world, there is so much that could be tapped. That is on one hand. You know, one guy joked to economists saying that if economists were only one-handed, the world would be in the better place. So we say there is one hand and on the other hand. So on the other hand, we think that it's not only the academia that could be feeding into the policy. And this is where the research frontier is actually trying to bridge that gap, where we have been always supplying the inputs to the policy other than responding to the demand of the policy. I think this is the time where we, academia as well, we have a role to listen to what the policymakers really want, what is on the policy agenda, and try to respond to that as we do our researches, and try to be responsive to the policy demands, as opposed to sitting into the computers, say this is what I think to be the research problem, and my hypothesis is like this, go to the field and confirm that. Let's listen to what the policymakers are up front and try to use our toolbox to make sure that we can feed into the policy process and make them do the informed decisions. Thank you.
Yes, please. Yeah, information is power, and at all high learning institutions, we have 3 core missions: teaching, research, and consultancies. So we really need to inform decision makers. Policies should be based on the research and the facts from the research. So we need really this partnership between the government, the universities or higher learning institutions, and the international community. For example, yes, we know that the trend is increasing of environmental degradation, but we as researchers, we have to come up with the clear data, how much is increasing, and what are the scenarios, what are the options to give to the government, to make the government have an informed decisions rather than having general statement. But also should be continuous, it should be monitored, it should be evaluated time with time. For example, my background is in agriculture. Yeah, we know that agriculture is one of the driving factors for environmental degradation. And we know there is this shifting cultivation, there are these low value addition things. We need to do a thorough research. It is not enough to say you should not do the shifting cultivation without giving options. These people, they are doing that out of desperate. If we provide increasing productivity per unit land, which is environmental friendly, then it should be done like that way. But also I wanted to say something on this enforcement. I think the issue of environmental, as we all know, is a cross-cutting. Everyone is involved. So the capacity building should start from the very grassroots up to the high level. We should build capacity at the village level, at the ward level, up to the ministry level. Otherwise, one party in isolation will not really do a better thing in addressing environmental things. So we as university, I think we should really be tasked to do a lot of research in relation to economic, environmental, and social perspectives. Thank you.
Much, Professor. Actually, you've bring up the issue of interdependence and cooperation between sectors. And we've talked about land pressure.
Moderator, may I add one thing?
Please.
May I add one?
Please, please.
Yes, of course, you talked about research. But again, the problem we are facing now, of course, in higher learning institutions, in particular universities, is the area that we pick for researches. Are they compatible with the politician? Because finally, you will need your research work to feed information to the politician. Do we have a gap in that regard? We do have a gap in that regard. For instance, currently we had a budget presentation of our session. It's going on in Dodoma. How many professors have come up with researches saying, you Mwijange, Minister maybe for industry, what should you do in order to revamp our country in terms of improving industries? Maybe January Makamba, my young brother, what should you do in order to manage the environment? Where are the professors? Where are the higher education? So you go to all universities in this country, you realize that we do have many research work, many research reports, okay? But what are they in nature? How are they in nature? Do they address problems that are being manifested in this country by normal people? Who has researched about the Machinga, for instance? You see, so there is a gap. So my appeal, if we want to manage the environment, we need to harness between the understanding of academician vis-a-vis what the politician want. And lastly, research reports must be readable, okay? In most cases, of course, when we do analysis of the findings, sincerely, It's us, the academician, who can assimilate those documents. It's us who can actually understand the language. They do not sort of present in the language which is friendly to the politician. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, we are now wrapping this session to allow questions from the audience. You've come up with a very good issue on are there any recommendation from the universities going to the government or to the politician? Now, I would like, Mr. Mugurusi, before we take the question to the audience, to say a little bit, very briefly, on this issue of land degradation and land pressure. Now we know there's a pressure for agriculture, for livestock, for grazing, and most of the agricultural estates, like coffee estate, sisal estate, most of these are turning into real estates. So do we have a government directives for these issues of land pressure and also aspect of logging? Do we have a logging act to address issues of forest and stuff like that? And the land, just briefly, and then we send that. Thank you.
Yes, the issue of encroachment in terms of changes of land use is common, but for the question of logging, that is addressed within the Forest Act. And so there is an act. I think last year I was honored to lead a prop committee on deforested areas in Rukwa, and we were surprised to discover that there is a species of trees that has no value in Tanzania, but is highly valuable abroad. And trucks and trucks of logs were being transported to the harbor, and it was very costly. One truck, the owners would pay more than $400,000. And so that's how the Ministry of Natural Resources discovered this problem and put up a prop team. But so there are areas, in terms of the legal framework, that's available. We just, I think, go back to the issue of information, of involvement of the communities, because the communities in those areas, in Kalambo district, were aware. But you see, sharing information, we are not partners until we have a common agenda. So sharing of information is extremely important. And so to answer the question, it's a common issue, and right now, land degradation is a factor in the internal displacement of people from one area to another, livestock keepers from one area to another. Recently, the Vice President's office undertook a very important exercise to protect the Great Ruaha, and they discovered that many areas, this was reported in the papers, that's how I say it, that there were encroachments in those areas. People were obstructing water without illegally actually acquiring permits, and settlements were being established. And this was a very useful exercise, and amendments were made in that area. And so we need, and that requires finance. And it can't be done every day, and it can't be done everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a round of applause now before we take to the question and answer? Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, we are going to have a question and answer session for 20 minutes. You will share in answering the question, so you can feel free to just share among yourself. It's not going to directly to anyone. Okay. Welcome. Whoever has got a question, comment, solution, suggestion, please. Thank you very much. Gentlemen there. Please make it brief.
Thank you very much. My name is Bariki Kali. I'm an environmental specialist. First of all, I would like to congratulate the facilitators and the panelists for excellent presentation. It's a wide field, so we cannot fill it. We cannot complete in one day. But I want us to share some few issues. First of all, if it is confirmed, land degradation in Tanzania, 61% of land is already degraded. It means that our productivity is getting less per unit area. The population now is 50 million. By 2030, the population will be over 100 million. The land will be even further degraded. How are we going to feed ourselves? Then, if we take that into account, it means we should be able to answer these questions straightforward, that we shall not be able to develop if the current situation will persist. Secondly, Honorable, from universities, I made a study. There is over 200 researches documented well about environmental degradation in Tanzania from 1980 up to now. Have we ever done any research to see the impact of these researches? How are we using these researches to develop? What we are doing now is just a matter of reinventing the wheel day after day. Honorable Professor, from 1980, we have said that deforestation in Tanzania is over 400,000 hectares. Up to now, we are still maintaining that it is over 375,000 hectares. Are we really serious? How can that be taking place year after year? There are some factors which we need to take into account. Honorable Facilitator, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think what you should do, let us collect a couple of questions, like 3 questions, and then we will get to answer them. Thank you very much for the question. And make it brief so that we can have many people to ask and contribute. Please, gentlemen there, I'm sorry I couldn't see you. Thank you.
I'm here.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Your Excellency, Dr. Batilda. My remark is with regard to some comments from Honorable Member of Parliament, Professor Sigala, with regard to basically, putting blames on the scientific community that we are producing quite a lot of stuff, but those materials are not communicated to the policymakers. I think we all take the responsibility that there is this disconnect between the scientific community and policymakers, and my view is that we should think on the best way we can actually share these research findings. And I must also confirm that we have been running annual events where basically we invite policymakers to also make sure that we digest those research findings in a language that everyone can understand, and share those key policy messages to policymakers. And it seems to be working very well. And of course, resources is a limiting factor, that there is a limit that you can, you have to just invite a few that can be accommodated within the limited resources that we have. But we take your observations very seriously. We have to really work on it and ensure that we package our research findings in a manner that can make sense to the policymakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was a good contribution. Do we have another question? Yes, gentleman at the back. Thank you. Yes, please.
Good morning. My name is Abdallah. My question goes to the professor. You say that our researchers are not doing the research that address the issue of the politician or policymakers. I think the issue of doing the research, you must have the control you have to have the control of the agenda. And to have the control of the agenda, it means you must invest on it. How much are we allocating on research? How much budget are we allocating on our research community? Because if we allocate enough, they'll be able to do the research that can address what our policymakers are looking for. But if you are depending on donor communities, definitely they have their agendas. So I think, how much are we allocating for research, especially to what extent have we addressed the Malabo Declaration, which requires, I think, every nation to allocate about 3 to 6% of our budget on research.
Thank you very much. The importance of R&D financing. And now, please, who would like to go first to answer the questions?
Maybe I should start because
okay, please.
Yeah,
very brief so that we can have another set of questions.
Absolutely. Number one, I talked on the importance of relevant research as far as political community is concerned. What are these relevant researches? Are common problems that are manifested in the society. That's applied research. That's what I'm talking about. So when you have researches that addresses problems that are manifestable by any person, they are valuable. That's number one. Number two, concerning how much do we place in terms of funds. Last year, for instance, we had about 2 billion shillings allocated to COSTECH. And COSTECH did a wonderful job because it announced the competition for proposal, or call for proposal, and I'm aware that up to now, about 50 researchers, they have awarded about 50 researchers. Now, the issue is, the 50 researchers, where do they stem? So I would like to propose that before any research institution maybe deploys calls for proposals, it's important to just send a signal to the government. Problems that you think are viable. So if the Minister of, maybe the Minister for Environment, then we say, okay, our problem is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the universities take those, and when you have finished that, will actually respond or give answers to the problems that the ministry face. That's my humble view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And please, go on.
Oh, thank you very much. I'll just like to add a little bit more on that research policy nexus. I think one of the possible solutions to this gap, which is really a real gap which we acknowledge in the research industry, that so much that we do doesn't feed into policy as much as we would have loved to feed. So one of the possible solutions is basically working together. Working together has been proven to work so well in so many countries. And a good example and some of efforts that are going on towards that is, I'm aware that the Department of Economics, the University of Dar es Salaam, for example, now is trying to set up an MOU with the Ministry of Finance to see into what extent the two could be working together, both into feeding but also responding to the demand that Ministry of Finance believe that the technical know-how of the Department of Economics could be helpful. We at the Environment for Development at the Department of Economics as well are trying to stimulate a similar sort of an MOU with the Vice President Office. We're still under the talks and we'll see where that would take us to. But I think this kind of joint partnership between academia and policy world could prove very fruitful, have proven very fruitful in other countries, and I believe they will prove very fruitful within Tanzania. In as much as we continue working in isolation, I'm afraid that this gap will be breached at a very slow rate than if we work jointly. Thank you.
A little bit, yeah. I wanted also to inform the Member of Parliament that we at the Institute of Resource Assessment, University of Dar es Salaam, have really contributed to the environmental policy, Environmental Management Act, and environmental regulations. So we are playing party, but it is not enough, as the others have been said. We need really more cooperation. But also at the University of Dar es Salaam, we are now taking research. You know, for us, we end up research. So we need someone to take in our research. We need a partnership with the private sector so that the research we are generating, the output of research, is now converted into socio-economic development. So at the University of Dar es Salaam, we have now established a Directorate of Innovations and Entrepreneurship, which now is taking the research output into actual use of poverty alleviation by involving stakeholders. So I would think also the government should really play a role by cooperating with the universities to take the research output to a real socio-economic development.
There was the first question on how are we going to feed ourselves, the issue of food security.
Well, yes. Well, we must survive because we already have the mechanisms in place. What's required now is implementation. So I have no doubt that we will perish. We won't, if that is the worry. I think there are many measures. This perhaps is not the forum to get into details of what programs have been put in place. And there are also best practice examples in the country. The area of Chilolo village, for example, in mitigation, and many other areas. So yes, as we have to brace ourselves to the problems, we need to realize that we are on course, and we should be able to surmount the problems. Thank you.
Very much.
Well, can you add a little bit on the
okay.
how we can feed our
okay.
Yeah.
When you're adding to that, can you talk a little bit, maybe also in the professor on economic department? Can you talk on do you think Tanzania will be able to implement the payment of environmental system? So when you ban using of illegal fishing gears, you support the community because of their contribution to catchment and protection and stuff like that. Can you say? You go and then see what's
okay, yes, about feeding the Tanzania community. Yes, we can. I was reading some of the information from FAO. Now the productivity per acre is less than 1 ton in many places. So if we really invest in the conservation agriculture, we can increase even up to 3, 4, 5 tons. So, but also we need to add value to our agricultural productivity. Most of our people, they are selling raw things, and that money they are getting from agricultural sector is not incentivized. That's why there are a lot of urban migration. So we need also to put a real good working infrastructure in the rural areas to support agriculture. So we will increase the productivity, yes, but we also need to improve the infrastructure there. We will even contain the urbanization if we improve the rural areas. We can also, yes, do the payment as long as we decide and we stick to that. It is possible to pay for environmental services, because you find most of the people who are selling charcoal, the degradation of the environment is external to them. If we put a mechanism that they pay also the environmental degradation by forcing them planting the trees, by forcing them working on the environment, the selling price of charcoal will be high, and when the price of charcoal is high, the demand will go low. Now the charcoal seems to be cheaper because most of the environmental degradation is external to the producers. So we need to put a mechanism that we force those who degrade the environment, they should also pay for the environment.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'll add to those 2 points. One is on food security, on the concern for food security with the increased pace of land degradation. One of the mitigation strategies that I think we should start thinking of, which we have already started to think on and work on, is the improving productivity of our lands. The yield of so many crops in Tanzania are so far from the yield potential. So for example, the maize, rice, production per acre is almost below 2 tons per acre, while the yield potential are up to 10 tons per acre. And the facts show that there is less than 10% of farmers in Tanzania use improved farming technologies, which could basically, with the same land cultivated now, we could increase our food productivity by more than 10-folds. So instead of going ahead clearing more land and more land, let's try to adopt this improved seed. Let's use fertilizer to the optimum amount that is needed and increase our productivity without clearing more land. And payment for ecosystem service and community-based participatory approach, yes, I think it could work so much. We have already piloted the RED and RED Plus arrangement in Tanzania, reduced the emission through deforestation and land degradation, and that has proven to work. We have to understand that in as much as we want to protect the forests, these are the source of livelihood of most of the rural communities. So it's very tempting to tell them, do not cut trees, do not get in there and do the hunting, and do not clear the tree for your farming and so forth. But we need to appreciate the fact that these are the fundamentals of their well-being. So the payment system will be very powerful and a powerful incentive to let these farmers or these rural households protect the environment while maintaining their well-being. We don't want to protect the environment while making our people more and more poor. We need to think of alternative fallback strategy. RED Plus has proven to work. Fishing communities have their own community participatory fishing control mechanism, which are proving to work. We can build on them, and I'm very optimistic about that.
Thank you very much. Mheshimiwa Waziri. Thank you.
I want to bring us back a little bit to the main theme. So China took 68.5 million people out of poverty over the past 5 years. 600 million people out of poverty over the past 30 years. And many people in China, India, Brazil. And China's development path is considered not clean. But they took a lot of people out of poverty. And most of the developed countries, when they were pursuing their development at the stage that we are now, environmental concerns were really not there. So one can say that the price of their development came as a result of using coal and all these other ways to develop. But now, and this is just trying to be devil's advocate here, now that they have attained a very high levels of economic development, you have an agenda that you should develop in a different way. And in other quarters, that way is considered quote-unquote costly. And there's an idea that probably develop first, clean later should work for us. And that the benefit of uplifting millions of people out of poverty would outweigh the cost of cleaning later. And that we should pursue the development the way they did, because development sometimes is about emulation, right? And I wanted to hear the perspective of the panel and the audience, because they are our partners, but they pursued development differently, and they want us to pursue it differently. So can we talk about it a little bit?
Thank you very much, Mheshimiwa Waziri. Who is going to take that? Can a green and blue economy get people out of poverty? Or we need to do unclean way so that we can get into a stage and then come and do the rest and clean up later. We could get this started, then we can get also Professor, some of the people from the audience. Can I try some from my panel? Thanks.
Well, I intrigued by that observation of the minister. I believe that there is value to take what is good and leave what is bad. The discussion on low carbon development pathway, for us it must imply that we are using our natural resources. And such natural resources such as coal can be used, but today perhaps there are opportunities that can provide technologies which are cleaner for coal. And so what we must demand for the international community to support us is clean core technologies. Because if we do not do that, then we will not only be the victims, but the environment will be the victim for us in terms of public health. So it's really not a one-way flow of a model. But we have our own model based on our own resources and our own capacity. And that is what actually propelled the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities under the UN framework. Common responsibilities, but implementation is on differentiated responsibilities. That principle came from Rio de Janeiro, and it's embedded now in the international global agreements on environment. And so I agree with the Honorable Minister, but we must model our own way rather than pick what others have done. Their conditions may be different. The levels of degradation may be very different. The social sensitivities to them may be different. So my view is that this is the approach. It must be an internal discourse. And as you said, that was a devil's advocate, and I like to view it that way.
Thank you very much. And anyone want briefly, very brief? And
yes.
One sentence,
I understand the interest of international community to advise the developing country to go for clean economies because environment affects everybody globally. However, for me, I wouldn't mind the path. What I would mind is the outcome. For example, if we want electricity and the people they are saying this development project that will generate electricity is harmful to the environment. So what is the alternative? We should always have an alternative of what we want to get, then it will work. But by saying no, this should not be done, without giving alternative, I think it will be difficult.
Thank you so much. Honorable Minister, you're raising a very fundamental question. And I just want to echo that this issue is not only in China, it's global. And we have what in economics we call environmental Kuznets curve, which has put clearly a fundamental theory that is in the environment and growth relationship is an inverted U. That as you grow your economy, you deplete your environment to a certain stage, you reach a maximum level where you have sufficient capital to invest in environmental abating technologies, and then the relationship starts to go the other way around. So, and Tanzania, basically, we are not far from that relationship. And that's why now we are recording impressive growth numbers, or at the same time, we are recording very alarming environmental degradation numbers. We are growing at the expense of the environment. So we are following a standard global trajectory. What we need to be concerned about is that tipping point for some of the natural resources that when they're gone, we'll never have them again. So we are talking of black rhinos now. We are talking about elephants, which when they go extinct, we'll never have an opportunity to bring them back. Those are the areas we really need to prioritize and see whether we need to continue with similar trajectory and let them go, because the gains we are getting from them now will no longer be there, and we don't want to get to the tipping point where we go back where we were. We took a lot out of poverty, and eventually we take them back.
Thank you very much.
Yes, indeed, the minister has posed a serious concern. But again, I should maybe do it in a few words. Number one, we are poor because others are developed. And the strategies for development literally are never shared publicly. And therefore, US today, no one can actually tell you what they did to develop. But they themselves, they know. I may pose a second question. Mexico borders US, United States of America. One is developed, the other one is not developed. But US is enjoying cheap labor from Mexico because it is not developed. Should the US pray for the development of Mexico? That's number 2. 3, Kenya is middle-income country. Tanzania is not. The products that are being sold in Tanzania, because it's a poor country, and Kenya is a middle, it's because we're poor. Should Uhuru Kenyatta and his government pray that we develop, we become like Kenya? Should that happen? Of course, big no. So I would like to say that, of course, in 1985, I came up with a book, which is titled Development is a War, What Do We Do? In that book, I narrated the importance of strategies that should be shared internally, because you'll never find anywhere the strategies that pushed any country to develop. It's important to be keen on that. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. I would also like to thank you. I would like to invite Mr. Mbeo to pick up on that. Can you say something a little bit on that? Yeah, just go.
Well, I was enjoying the discussion, and reached a section of growing fast and cleaning later, and things came to my mind, and I asked myself, what were the circumstances then? What are the circumstances now? And someone talked about losing this natural resource that we have, and we can never recover them. And the question posed to me, 20% or 40% of our GDP come from this natural resource. If it's gone, will we still be in the same pathway, or we'll lose it and we've also lost what is bringing the income? And there's the trade-offs, of course, the concept that the professor brought of the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. Here we're having a question. We put in bit of the budget, they bring bit of the budget, we develop without destroying our income, without destroying our natural resources. But in the second aspect, we put in our own national budget, and we bring in our grandsons and grandchildren's budget to clean it up later. What are we going to take vis-a-vis the other? It's a kind of a heated discussion, and it's talked of Kenya and our Uhuru Kenyatta. And yeah, I pray that we develop together and not one left behind. Thank you.
Can we have another? I think we are behind time, but maybe we can have another last set of questions. Yes, please. There's a gentleman there.
Thank you. My name is Alan Kimambo. My question goes to the panelists. And how can innovation and technology help to combat the climate change and actually the issue of degradation? And how are the universities and the ministry, what are the initiatives that the universities and the ministry have taken so that to embrace this area of technology and the innovation to combat the climate change issue?
Thank you very much, Kimambo. And there was also a gentleman with a red shirt there.
My name is Albert Mzirai. I just wanted to, Professor Sigela pointed out about competent personnel and promotion that can help in effective management of our environment. But I think there is also issue of policy harmonization, because when it comes to policy, different policy address different with regard to conservation and development. And to me, I think there is a need to strategically prepare our policies with regard to conservation and development. And in this particular, I would like to ask the academia, and more specifically from the university, how best we can prepare this policy, our policy strategically to address the conservation and the development need of this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was, okay. And then you'll follow later. Thanks.
Thank you very much. My name is Mark Baker, and I'm a director of Carbon Tanzania. We're a RED project developer here in Tanzania. Landscape investment is already happening. We're employing tens of people. We're transferring hundreds of millions of shillings to communities in 3 districts in the country. So my question to the panel is not, do we need to find solutions? The solutions are already there. The question is, how do we attract those investors and solutions into Tanzania? That's the question.
Thank you very much. How to scale up those, inviting more. We have one other one, and we can start answering.
My name is Doi Mazenzele. My question is, what is the role and effectiveness of land use planning in addressing land degradation, climate change vulnerability, and supporting sustainable industrialization?
Thank you very much. Now, let us start. Who's going to go first? The last question. Can you pick up the last question? Yes, please.
Hello. The question is, hello. I think you have to put off for that. Yeah. Okay. Land use is a tool of general management in environmental concerns. It's a very useful tool because it determines how land uses are used. And if you can have land use plans, then they can organize the activities on land. I think part of the problem we have is that they have not been followed, or rather implemented, because I know that land use plans were established, were formulated in this country in the 1980s for all regions. But they are very nice books. They are in the Ministry of Lands. And when I look at what is happening, I note that they were not implemented. So land use is land use plan is extremely important.
Thank you. And this question from Mark, how can we scale up? How can we bring more financing into what is already done on the payment of ecosystem services?
Yeah. Yes, that again is a very important issue, payment of ecosystem services. It has been initiated in this country as well, and I think there are examples. And so I think it's the question of upscaling that and applying it in various ecological settings. So it's not new. It's basically upscaling it and reaching out to many communities. I think in part, WMA's wildlife management areas answer to that question as well, and they've been established in this country. So there are good examples, actually, which can be addressed in various parts of the country.
We are behind time. And the MC is kind of restless here. Now, we can wrap up in summing up by just answering the issue of harmonization of policies. And the university, there was a question also for university role in harmonization of this briefly.
Okay.
The two of you can go and then.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Number one, regarding researches, I would say, while it's true that, of course, higher education do researches, But indeed, I do appeal to politicians to utilize those researches. That's number one. Number two, it's important that we verge into competence-based recruitment, promotion, and appointment. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I would like to say briefly about the policy formulation process and how best to address any policy challenge and better formulation for environmental challenges addressing. So I would like to acknowledge the fact that we have quite a number of good policies in the country. And most of them have been prepared in a very participatory approach, which we so much promote. And in so many times, the academia has been brought on board as part of the process in that participatory, as part of the stakeholders. But in some extent, just to provide inputs to already structured policy document, and in some of the cases, to start from the very scratch of the preparation of the document. So I'm not so worried about the existence of policy to safeguard environmental issues in the country. I'm more concerned about the putting those policies into action. Thank you.
Thank you very much. After this, I would like to, on behalf of the panelists, to thank you very much for this very interactive session. I'm not sure if we've done justice to the topic. It's huge, it's vast, and they've tried our best. And I'm sure the coming session will now look into in depth of all these aspects that have been discussed. Having said that, I would like to thank you very much, and could you please raise a round of applause to the panelists. Thank you very much. Asante sana.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Purian. Another hand for them, please. And the theme was can Tanzania develop? You can please step down now while I prepare. The theme for this one was can Tanzania develop with the current trends of environmental degradation. I was just thinking out loudly to myself, what about education and the end user? How do we incorporate that person there, the farmer, the fisherman, the basic peasant, into this whole process? Anyway, I now call on the second panel to come up, which is the economic consequences of climate change to Tanzania. So if I can have the theme introduction to be done by Professor Zambichaka, can he please come up? And then can I have Professor Pius Yanda to come up? And then if I can have Dr. Marco Njana, who is standing in for Professor Zahabu. And then we have Honorable Ambassador Lars Ronas to join us. And then Mr. John Hecky asked to join us. And the moderator is going to be Professor Wandosia, the former Minister for Environment. If I can kindly request, when you do the Q&A, can you please state your name and where you're from when you reach to that point? So, karibuni sana. Professor, I hand over to you. It's now yours. And when you speak, please, can you make sure that the microphone is close to you, at least this top part here, with it up? In the previous session, some of you, we could not hear some of you because the mic was far away from your mouth. So please, if you can just adjust it accordingly. Thank you.
Oops, yeah. Good morning and maybe good afternoon already. Yeah. It's a pleasure, indeed, an honor that I should be invited to be part of this extremely interesting symposium. I would like to thank the Honorable Minister, Minister Makamba, for this honor that you have done me, and indeed you have done all of us, the panelists, as well as the invitees. Our session is is, I guess, as interesting as will be as interesting as the previous session. We have an outlay here of very competent and able people, including, of course, our visitors, our guests from Norway and Sweden, and who are adding an international perspective to this symposium. I would like to thank you for your presence here. Part of the tradition of Nordic countries, internationalism and multilateralism, of course, and bilateral partners of Tanzania over a long time. And so it's a, let me, without further ado, I think, invite Professor Msambi-Chaka to get us started. And then everything will roll on from whatever he has to tell us in the few minutes that he has. Professor Msambi-Chaka, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Msambi-Chaka. It's 12:30. And the efficiency curve starts going down. So if you find someone not looking at you, concentrating, don't disturb him or her. We are here in this session to talk about climate change, which you may associate with environment, or sea level, air quality, or true. And I'm sure there are very few persons in this house or in this hall who do not remember or who don't know that this year we had the devastating floods in Dar es Salaam. These floods are still giving hell and devastating many parts of the country. They've costed lives, and some people have been displaced. Now, our discussion is on economic consequences of climate change to Tanzania. Let me start by saying that climate change involves all the three dimensions of sustainable development. That is the economics part, the environmental, and the social dimension. When in the late 90s or early 2000s, we discussed about environment, for Tanzanians, if you translate in Kiswahili, there were some different interpretations going even to magic. But now I think things have changed. Now, addressing the climate change challenges, I say demands a long-term perspective on how our actions today will affect the lives of our children. And it also demands a dialogue with all stakeholders involved in order to reach a viable or sustainable solution. I'm encouraged, or it is encouraging to note that this has been taken care of in this high-level symposium, with the dialogues being held in various parts like in Nazimoja, Mbagara, and not to forget the interfaith dialogue that will take place at Kisenga tomorrow on 2nd June. I say this is commendable, since participation or involvement of stakeholders is a must, not optional, is a must for sustainability of the solutions which we resolve or recommend. Now, as for economic consequences of climate change in Tanzania, let me say very briefly the following, because I'm sure the panel members will have a lot to say because they are gurus. Tanzania's economy is very much dependent on the climate. A large portion of our GDP is associated with climate-sensitive activities such as agriculture, livestock, fisheries, tourism, energy, you name it. And to be more elaborate, don't get bored by the numbers or statistics. They are not scaring. We are saying about 30% of GDP comes from agriculture, which is climate sensitive. And more than 65% of the population live beyond the district headquarters, and they're engaged in agricultural activities which are again sensitive to climate. Extreme events such as droughts and floods lead to major economic costs in Tanzania. We are informed through research that the individual annual events have economic costs in excess of 1% of GDP. Now, I just, out of curiosity, I took the 2016 GDP, which was 47.7 billion US dollars. 1% of that goes to around, approximately, 500 million US dollars. And if you turn it into T shillings, you go into billions. This occurs regularly, and it reduces long-term growth and affects millions of Tanzanians and their livelihoods. For those who are in Dar es Salaam, think of Mabwe Pande. More will be said, I'm sure, by the members of the panel, but let me also make the following remark. Research does indicate that Tanzania is not adequately adapted to the current climate. And we are informed that the country has a large adaptation deficit, which requires urgent action to be taken. Large adaptation deficit. I think for many people, if you talk about money, financial deficit, they would probably get it. But we are saying there is a large adaptation deficit in Tanzania. And future climate change could lead to large economic crisis. Now, while uncertain, again, researchers are saying, while uncertain, it is said that future net economic costs could be equivalent to 1 to 2% of the GDP per year by the year 2030. Now, if you hear 2030, it sounds very far. It's just around the corner, 12 years from now. If you have a child, she or he will not qualify to vote by the year 2030. So it's just around the corner. Again, we're informed through research that the combined effects of current climate vulnerability and future climate change are large enough to prevent Tanzania achieving key economic growth targets, development targets, poverty reduction targets, including the planned timetable for achieving the middle income status by 2025. Adaptation can reduce these impacts, but they have a cost and require a significant level of funds. We are saying, where will these funds come from? Other potential economic consequences that Tanzania could be faced with due to climate change could possibly be loss of productivity, loss of infrastructure, reduction of crop yields, increase in food prices, which would affect the consumer's income, increase in the cost of energy, reduce the land availability, which could push up land prices, mass migration to more secure areas, and heavy costs on the part of the insurance industry, assuming that by improving your livelihoods and quality of life, most of you will be insured, including your properties. So if this happens, the insurance industry will incur a lot of costs. We hope, or I hope, the panelists will be able to point out or discuss some of the how part of adaptation issues by discussing or pointing out issues related to policies, strategies, capacity building, institutions, sources of finance, priority areas, technology, and governance. In conclusion, and what next? I'm making the following. I'm saying that the burden of climate change will not be uniformly distributed across the globe. No. And two, that the burden of climate change will be felt most by the developing countries to which Tanzania belongs. And to what next? After talking all this, what next I'm trying to propose is that there is a need of building a national capacity for adaptation and mitigation. If you open up the capacity, it will involve capabilities. So you could have a national disasters authority. If you open up the capacity again, you find the finance. So you might wish to have a fund for that. The capacity part of it includes also infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not my voice. I just borrowed it. I have the actual voice. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Professor Msambichaka. Wherever you borrowed your voice, but you have delivered your thoughts methodically and very eloquently. I think you've started the ball rolling. The facilitator is always reminding me of that we don't have much time, but the subject matter is interesting. But anyway, I'll invite panelists to sort of introduce themselves and get on started after introducing yourselves. And we start with Professor Yanda.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Mandosia. My name is Professor Yanda from the University of Dar es Salaam.
Oh, by the way, we have 3 minutes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll try my best not to repeat what has already been said by previous speakers. I must acknowledge contribution made by the chief guest, Her Excellency Vice President. She touched on issues of climate change, and obviously the Honorable Minister Makamba, and also our colleague here, Professor Msemchaka. One, I want to confirm that climate is changing, and it is here to stay. And unfortunately, climate change has no political boundaries. That's why this global challenge of today has actually put us together to work together as a global community. Now, having said that, I should mention that the current climate variability is already giving us indicators on how serious this problem is. We have noted extreme weather events and how those events have actually created devastating effects, to the communities and natural systems as well. We have few examples that we can cite. Drought that happened some few years back, which actually led into a huge death toll of livestock, but also equally flooding or heavy rains. They end up not being a blessing as well. But I think what I want also to share with you is that the future is even does not give a brighter situation, because what we are seeing is that temperature is increasing, and even now, even if we stop emitting greenhouse gases today, the already emitted greenhouse gases into the atmosphere will continue causing havoc. So really, in the near future, we have to really see to it that we put strategies in place to adapt to the anticipated climate change impacts. So the future climate change actually will lead into increased frequency and magnitude of extreme weather events. And according to the UN report, is that already the magnitude and frequency of extreme events has actually increased, quite substantially, indicating that there will be more frequency and the magnitude will be much higher in the future. Leave alone those extreme events, even in years with good rains, what we may wish to call it good rains. But even the rainfall distribution within, a cropping season is not all that favorable. There are cases where we experience frequent crop failures, simply because the pattern is no longer actually posing a lot of problems for crop producers, for smallholder farmers. But severe drought and extreme weather and heavy rains are posing a lot of problems, especially natural systems, social systems, infrastructure, you name it. So the future scenario may actually be much more complicated in terms of having those extremes being magnified. Now, I think what is currently associated with those responses, we can take an example of migration. People running away from areas which have been seriously hit by drought, and they move to other areas. This is actually leading into conflicts, resource use conflicts, but also in some other cases when there is a complete crop failure, they end up, clearing forests, so that they can. The most affected members of the communities are those ones who are poor. How do we ensure that we strategically address these challenges, or rather anticipated climate change impacts in the planning process? Not only in those in the Ministry of Natural Resources, Energy and Water, but I think we have to consider all these different sectors altogether. I mean, I'm just taking an example of, Minister of, Communication, Infrastructure, and so on and so forth. I think those are relevant ministries as well, looking at how some of the infrastructures are likely to be damaged simply because of the extreme events. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, without wasting more time, but before I invite another speaker, I guess being at the chair that the minister is sitting now, I'm sure he's thinking aloud as to what are the policy prescriptions that would arise out of your talk. Dr. Yanda? Yeah, please, you can respond.
Yeah, thank you. One aspect that I would like to just to emphasize is that there is so much that has been done in terms of putting together, policy documents, be it a strategy, which are basically guiding on the best way we can actually mainstream climate change into a planning process. I think what is now needed to be done is to ensure that those sort of guidelines are really operationalized in a way that we see to it that all these sort of what is needed to be done in different sectors are really taken on board. So I think that's one aspect that the Vice President's office may wish to look at. But I think this is also a challenge that we need to work together, leave alone the government, but also the scientific community, as well as the civil society organizations, private sector, to see to it that we are really addressing this challenge, collectively. The other issue is that I think this is what was also reflected in the previous session, that how do we ensure that some of these research findings which are being generated by various researchers, not only Tanzanians, even those from outside, are actually fed into policy process. And of course, that has already been clarified that we scientists have a role to play in terms of packaging those research findings in a manner that they are clearly articulated in a manner that they have very clear key policy messages for the policymakers to take up. But then how do we communicate that? Is it just the matter of handing in those documents to Honorable Minister? Or should we have a forum where we can actually sit together and deliberate on, discuss those matters and come up with sort of deliberations on the way forward? And for me, that would be the best. And of course, one of the previous speakers also said that we have to change, we scientists, the way we do things in terms of research. And I really agree, and this is that's the route that we are taking now, that the whole process has to be, research process has to be sort of, integrated in terms of bringing in the anticipated end users of the research findings. The word core knowledge generation is a key word that has to be used. Communities on the ground are likely to face in the future. Likewise, these other sectors as well. So as we actually bring on board, all those anticipated challenges that are likely to come about as a result of climate change impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. May I invite Dr. Marco Njana from SWA, and perhaps you could have a minute to to elaborate what you're doing as part of the National Carbon Management Center and satisfy the doubting Thomases that why are we required to plant more trees and protect our forests and be paid for it, and for others to continue to pollute. Please, continue.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Mandosia, for allowing me to share my opinions and contributions. Yeah, initially I would like to introduce myself. I am Marco Njana from the National Carbon Monitoring Center, which is housed at the Sokoine University of Agriculture. I'm happy to be here to contribute to the agenda in question. Yeah, I would like to start by saying that I will be efficient in my contribution. I will not be repeating what has been shared earlier. Yeah, we have noted that since morning to date, majority of the contributors have highlighted the fact that the climate change impacts are evident and are felt everywhere in many parts of the world, including Tanzania. And this suggests that Tanzania is a country and the other parts of the world we have no choice but rather to deal with this environmental matter. Yeah, and we have two options ahead of us in dealing with this matter, and one of such options is mitigation, while the other one is adaptation. Yeah, some speakers have contributed what we can do and where we are in terms of adapting ourselves in facing the impacts of, in dealing with the impacts of climate change. Yeah, and therefore I will do more on the mitigation aspect. Yeah, it should be understood that in order for a country to be able to meet the mitigation targets, there is one policy or initiative which is known as effort to reduce deforestation. And if you allow me to put it in short terms, it is known as RED+, which stands for reduction of emission from deforestation and forest degradation. So this is one of the initiatives which can help us as a nation and the mitigation targets. Yeah, and in order for a country to be able to achieve or implement what is known as RED, there are a number of steps a country is required to go through. And the first one is preparatory phase, the second phase is early action, and the third phase is the actual or full-scale implementation. Yeah, where we are as a country, we are currently in phase 1, where we are preparing ourselves in implementing the RED+, which is an initiative for mitigation, as said earlier. Yeah, what we have done under this is that the Ministry of Natural Resources and Tourism, from 2009 to 2013, implemented what is called the first National Forest Inventory, where the ministry was able to quantify the extent of forests in Tanzania. Along with that, the ministry was able also to quantify the level of forest loss. And besides that, the ministry or the results from this mission was able to quantify the deficiency in wood supply and suggested means or actions to be taken in order to fill the gap. And the country, we have been able to prepare what we call the National Ready Strategy, which define key actions to be taken in order for a country to mitigate the level of emission. Another thing also, we have prepared the intended national determined contribution, and recently the government or the nation ratified the Paris Agreement, and therefore we are currently preparing ourselves to to change the intended national contribution into the national contributions and submit it to the relevant body as required. Yeah, another achievement or initiative in place in relation to mitigation of climate change is the establishment of the National Carbon Monitoring Center, where I'm currently working. Yeah, it should be undermined that establishment of an institution of this kind is important, because we may plan, but without a well-placed institution and vested with the specific mandates, we will not achieve anything. So currently, we are implementing a project which is establishing or putting in place the National Carbon Monitoring Center. It's a 3 years project, and we have done a number of things. But I would like to share with you key achievements to date. One of such achievement is I should maybe initially state or say what we are doing at the National Carbon Monitoring Center. Our major role is to measure, verify, and report carbon emissions in the forest sector in Tanzania. And we have prepared, at the moment, the forest reference emission level, which is a key requirement before one is able or eligible to implement RED+, and therefore be eligible for the incentive for demonstrated achievements. So we have prepared the forest reference emission level and submitted it to the United Nations, and which is currently being considered for publication. Another thing, we have prepared the deforestation map, which is the nationwide deforestation map. It estimates the level of deforestation across the country, and also it estimates it informs us spatially where are the deforestation hotspots. Just for your information, that at the moment the level of deforestation is 469,000 hectares per year. We are losing that much of forest in the country. This is so much loss of in the country in terms of resources, and we should really think critically. Actions needed to be taken. Maybe I will share other. I will continue later. Let me hand on to the next speaker. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Njana. Before I call on the next speaker, Honorable Ambassador Lars, may I reflect on the following? Perhaps he may also wish to address, and that is internationalism, multilateralism, international cooperation is under siege. In the last 2 years, and we don't know where this is taking us, and its impact on all the discussions that we're having. But of course, as I said initially, we are lucky to have our Norwegian partners who have been very steadfast in the issue of multilateral cooperation. And without multilateral and international cooperation in climate change, mitigation as well as adaptation, there's no way we can go forward. And hopefully, in place of United States, you may wish to say how you are stepping up the efforts. The Norwegians, not Norwegians, the Nordic countries have always been the forefront in the fight in the climate change discussions, and also in adaptation, and also in mitigation. So I think that needs some discussion here, and you may wish to comment on this as you proceed. May I invite you? It's an honor that we should have you here, Ambassador. Please have you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to this. It's a real privilege and pleasure to be back in Dar es Salaam and to be addressing this audience. I fully agree with you that if we are to resolve and address this issue, we need a multilateral system, we need a multilateral order, we need cooperation. And that is certainly under siege, and countries like ours need to join up in addressing it. I would also like to build on what Professor Janda was saying here, that there are two stories to be told, two different stories, but they're very, very closely linked. And the first one is that we are seeing today climate change taking place at an unprecedented level, and at a level which goes beyond what science has predicted. And we see it in extreme weather events, drought, flooding, melting ices. And this is caused by human activities, by global emissions. Nature is showing red flag, and you don't negotiate with Mother Earth. This is not how nature will adapt. Nature will adapt. It's a question how human societies will adapt, because there is no planet B we have. Now, if we are to talk about emissions, and Tanzania is, of course, a minor contributor to global emissions. So if we are to talk about homework to be done, we should go to other capitals now, how to reduce emissions. But my point here is really, how does the development model look as we look ahead that will be climate compatible, that will be within the planetary boundaries? Because that is what's being addressed throughout the world today. And I think it's important that we as countries, Sweden and Tanzania, can collaborate in finding and in looking for that model. Because we don't have a model to replicate. As a mature economy, we are struggling to get out of our old clothes. Yeah. The good news is, of course, that this is being recognized worldwide now. Emission is largely caused by our energy system. And energy is at the heart of development. Energy is at the heart of getting better lives, of getting better living standards. So how can we move from one energy system based on fossil to a renewable system? And just 3 points to illustrate what's happening. Last week, there was an open letter by 59 investors, global investors, representing over $10 trillion US. These were in an open letter to the oil and gas industry saying, what are you doing in terms of the Paris Agreement? They're calling on the oil and business industry to address this. It was mentioned here on the insurance. Yes, the insurance companies, they are the ones who are looking into the future. And over the past 3 years, they have seen unprecedented losses because of the extreme weather events. So last week, you had the biggest European insurance company representing $500 billion euro. Now, the largest European company saying, insurance company saying, we will pull out of insurance. We will not insure coal industry any longer. We will not, and we will move out of investing in anything that has to do with coal, because they don't see any future there. There is no future there, and they only see losses. And my third point here is banks with global reach are now pulling out of saying we will not lend to the coal industry any longer. So that's on the downside, what we are moving out of. So what are we moving into instead? What is the new? And we are, I'm pretty confident to say we are at the threshold of a new structural transformation, a structural transformation that you could talk about of a sustainability revolution, because we need to find that that kind of technology that can bring society and can be sustained over time. No. So my final point here is just to recall what an OECD study said to the G20 countries last year. That study showed that if you invest climate smart, if you invest climate compatible, you will actually enhance growth. You will get better growth in the long term. But failure to act will bring huge costs for society to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Lars. One issue that has been brought up by both Professor Msambi-Chaka and Ambassador Lars is the issue of insurance. We may wish from the floor to discuss this issue, or raise it, highlight it, and see how how relevant it is to Tanzania, and what is the, I'm seeing crops being destroyed. I'm seeing houses being destroyed because of climate variability-related factors. How does the insurance industry come in? And I'm wondering if there is any representative of the Tanzanian industry, the insurance industry here, and how do we see that aspect? Is it part of the growth of the industry itself? But certainly it's something that we have to think about. With those remarks, may I invite John? Yeah. From the Norwegian Embassy.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, Professor. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jon Heikki Aas. I'm a counselor at the Norwegian Embassy with a responsibility for climate change and environment. And as a representative of the international community, I would like to say that my views are those of the outsider. So I think there might be good reason to make observations from the outside, but at the same time it's important that it is Tanzanians that needs to find the solutions to these issues. With that, I would like to start by congratulating Tanzania on the ratification of the Paris Agreement. This is really something we have been looking forward to, and it shows that Tanzania is taking climate change seriously. Being asked to speak on the importance of economic consequences of climate change, I was very happy to be asked to do that, because I think the economic consequences of climate change are actually not that well known or understood. This is because we might see flooding or drought, and we might recognize them as climate change effects, but we might not recognize that they have an economic effect on the national economy. And I think that's very important to realize. And the same goes for many of the ecosystem services that is provided by nature. We don't recognize their economic value, but the value of water provision, the value of arable soil, these things have an economic value, and we need to realize it, and we need to account for it. And I think that is very important. And of course, realizing that climate change has economic consequences is important because these consequences affect a country like Tanzania's and any country's ability to alleviate poverty and to provide development for their population. And I have seen one study that shows a single event of drought or flooding can have the economic impact of 1% of Tanzania's GDP. I think that is quite dramatic. It shows that Tanzania's economy and Tanzania's economic growth could actually be reduced due to climate change. So these are things I think we should realize in order to have this discussion. I was very happy to, when looking through policy papers on climate change from Tanzania, I was very happy to see that all of this is actually reflected. Tanzania's policy documents are very good. Reading the INDC, which now functions as the NDC, the Nationally Determined Contributions to the UN Climate Change Convention, they write about the economic consequences of climate change. And there are figures there. So all this is realized. This means that all that is needed is to implement the plans. And that sounds simple, and of course it isn't, but that is what is needed now. It is important to realize that climate change, as all of environment, is not a sector responsibility. It is a cross-sectoral responsibility. It means that all parts of government needs to work together to solve the issues. It has been mentioned time and again that agriculture is the largest or a very large part of Tanzania's GDP. It has also been mentioned that it is very vulnerable to climate change. So I won't go into detail about that. But it is a fact that in order to deal with climate change in Tanzania, adaptation in the agriculture sector is highly needed. The reason is to keep up the food production at the current climate is a challenge in itself, because as far as I know, the productivity of Tanzanian agriculture is not very high. It also needs to keep up with a 3% annually growth in population. And it needs to keep up with the effects of future climate change, which is likely to actually reduce productivity of the agriculture sector. So anything that can be done now to adapt the agriculture sector is very, very important. And I would like to stress a point that I think is crucial, another one. Early action is much less expensive than late action. So moving now to deal with these things is much better than dealing with the damage that is done when it's done. So that was the adaptation part. I think a low-carbon development pathway is something that Tanzania should consider, as it's likely, as my colleague Lars mentioned, it's likely to be economically beneficial in the long run. It might not be economically beneficial at the moment, but in the long run, it's quite certain that it will be. This would mean Tanzania could leapfrog across traditional high-carbon pathways and move into low-carbon pathways. Mitigation of climate change greenhouse gas emissions is part of such a pathway. And I note that deforestation is a major emission source in Tanzania. I also know that government is quite aware of this and dealing with it. And I would like to commend the government of Tanzania for the work they're doing to combat deforestation. Part of this effort is what my good friend Marco mentioned about reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, or known as REDD+. This is a low-cost mitigation option. And as a low-cost option, I think it should be explored further. It is also a potential source of income, actually, for the international mechanism for results-based payments for emissions reductions. And also, of course, it should be mentioned that international financing sources are ready to fund actions for all I've mentioned at the moment, such as the adaptation project that Tanzania has actually secured in Simiyu district through the Green Carbon Fund. I think that's a very good example of what can be achieved with the support of the international community. And I'd like to just mention again, if I may, the international community is ready to support Tanzania for these things, but you have to find the solutions. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your thoughtful and remarks. I think rather than engaging ourselves in view of time, I think we better engage the audience because we're really limited for time. And in the course of the discussions, we will interact. So may I invite the floor, anybody from the floor?
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Frank Theodori from Zumba University. Thank you, the panelists, for quite impressive talk regarding climate change, the impact of climate change. As we all know that climate change is an omnipresent issue globally, and in fact, it has already threatened the future growth, ecologically and economically. And we do have adaptation. The one of the strategy try to curb the situation of climate change impact in Tanzania. And my question is, adaptation being a traveling idea from the global north to the global south, is it really reflected in the social-cultural context of the local population? Because as we all know that climate change is not a new thing to local communities in Tanzania or in Africa. These people have lived with climate change for quite ages, and they have been adapting in various ways. But having this adaptation as a traveling idea from the global north to the global south, it means we are trying to sideline the local cultural aspect of adapting to climate change. So I would like to know, or what are you commenting from the panelists with regard how do we take into consideration, take on board the local way of adapting to climate change? Thank you.
Thank you. Can anybody respond from, yes, Dr. Enda?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Prof. Let me just say that I'm not sure whether adaptation is well, a concept may have been derived from somewhere else. But basically, when you talk about adaptation, basically it's more of creating a situation whereby the anticipated impact, in other words, you'll not be very much affected by the anticipated impact of climate change. So the way we do things nowadays, basically we acknowledge the indigenous knowledge. In other words, the way communities have been responding to those challenges, and those are factored in sort of the adaptation strategy. So I'm not sure whether it's really a top-down, but rather it's both bottom-up and top-down. So we recognize what communities have been dealing with some of those challenges. That's all what I can say. Thank you.
I think the speaker from the floor has raised an interesting issue, and your remark is also indeed pertinent in the sense that what we need to do, and this is I've always been trying to think it's an issue that could be taken up by our research institutions, is to explore and research in indigenous knowledge in matters of adaptation. And this is something that we can do and we should do, and recognize that knowledge and perhaps enhance it where needs be. So indigenous knowledge in matters related to climate adaptation, I think, is an important issue. Yeah. Any other person? Yeah.
Yes.
Where's the...
I have the mic now.
You have the mic, yeah, please.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Carol Ndosi from the Kilimanjaro Project. And my question is one to follow up on the adaptation, but also to ask about the economic consequences now of what we are trying to do, and possibly the elephant in the room, whom I don't know if anybody else... Now shut me up, okay. So the adaptation, I remember yesterday I was reading from somebody who was attending the meeting at Mnazi Mmoja, the launch, and they had mentioned the option of, not the option, or rather encouraging Tanzanians to shift to gas instead of using charcoal. So now the economic consequence of this, I'm asking, in that adaptation, one gunia of charcoal goes for 60,000 plus. One can for gas goes for like 45, 48, 52. It depends where you are. When we're trying to encourage the majority of Tanzanians to shift to gas instead of charcoal, and the alternatives that we're producing right now, are they really affordable and accessible to everyone else? So when we're talking about adaptation, are we really considering all these factors? That's one. And two, with the economic consequence now, for example, if you're looking at the Stigler's Gorge and what is happening or what is about to happen, the tender that was put out by the government and the logging, of course, when those trees get into the market, what happens to the businessmen and women who are already in the market? Will that somehow affect the price of the logs in the market? How are we preparing ourselves to accommodate that particular change? And how are we encouraging adaptation in the market to accommodate this particular venture?
Carol, where is the elephant? Anyhow, any response from... Yeah. Any response from the panelists? Yes, Ambassador.
I'm not going to comment on gas in Tanzania, but let me just comment on fossil energy vis-à-vis renewable energy. And fossil energy represents 80% of all energy. But when you look at newly installed capacity, what is being installed now, this year and last year, 2/3 of all energy globally is renewable energy. It's solar and wind, and it's driven by markets. It has now come into scale, and it's by prices, and it's competitive. And there is just making it's when something becomes somewhat cheaper than something else. It's like water going from -1 to +1. It opens up, and we will see this coming very in a wide way now. Solar and wind is what is now gaining ground.
The response can come even from the floor. Honorable Minister, did I see? Wanted to put you on the spot on Stigler's Gorge.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I was intrigued by, I think, your statements, Ambassador, about alternative investments or investors pulling out of fossil fuel or carbon. Oh, sorry. My name is Aiden Yakuze from Twaweza. Sorry, Minister. I was interested in how fast that is actually happening. The disinvestment out of coal or other fossil fuel investments in energy. And the second one is this notion of what they call stranded assets. Stranded assets, by my understanding, are those oil companies who have, as part of their valuation, very large reserves of, say, oil and gas. And those assets are stranded because if they are actually released and put into production, the planet is going to be fried in a short space of time. And yet Tanzania is talking about investing in gas and gas production. Is that a good thing in your view, or is that just a step, a right step into getting out of fossil fuel in general and into the wind and solar that you have just spoken about?
Yes, please.
I'm not in a, it would be a, it's not for me to comment on the choice that Tanzania is making. You have to make your own calculations and see what's good. No, seriously, it would be presumptuous of me to come here and to say that. So, but what I'm saying is that when you look at large investors in the world and banks, HSBC, PNB Paribas, the Scotland Bank and others, they are moving out of this because they don't see any future in it. And that stranded asset could come quickly or later on, but they don't see any future. And would we continue to base our economy on fossil and with carbon emissions? That could rapidly turn to posing rapid threats to our society and would bring more drastic changes. So what the option we have, now you could say it poses a threat. Inaction is a threat. Action poses opportunities. And the earlier we take actions, the more opportunities there are there for building better societies. It's better to be first with the latest than to be last with what came first. No. And I overheard, I was listening to a head of state from an African country saying, why should we stay with floppy disks when we're into 5Gs now? And this, we had the information revolution. We are going to have a sustainability revolution. And that technology we need to adapt in our country, and you would have to do it well. And by that we can build better societies. This is about projecting a vision of hope. This is about saying we can build good societies that can be sustained over time.
Thank you. Would you like to head on to that?
Yes, if I could. Thank you, Professor. If I could just add on to that. I think one example of what would be a stranded technology in Tanzania would be to introduce landline telephones. Because African countries have been very efficient in taking into use mobile technology. And that is a technology that is not fully developed even in my country. So on that, at that stage, previous questions, Chair, the question about adaptation sidelining local knowledge, I think that would be a big mistake. I think local knowledge is the basis for good adaptation. One specific example that I know fairly well is that local knowledge about seeds and seeds that are well adapted to drought, for example, is crucial, and there's a lot of international work now identifying those drought-resistant seeds that can be used for global agriculture. So taking into account local knowledge, I think, is crucial. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other intervention from the floor? I'll have two quick ones. Yeah. Here. This one?
This one?
Yeah, the lady there.
Chose the red dress to the black dress.
Introduce yourself. Right?
Yeah, my name is Rebecca Muna, working with Forum CC. My contribution will be more on, at macro level, looking at the economic cost of climate change. The presenter from Norwegian Embassy has pointed out in Tanzania, the real cost of climate change is not known. And when I'm looking at it, it means it has implication even on how we plan and allocate resources. And eventually, actually, the cost will be higher than what would expect. And when I look at it, it means that even the implication to our various development process, it means we are missing out. Because when even you look at Tanzania climate change strategy, very few sectors have really integrated, because the consequences really are not, felt or realized. So it is really important to have the numbers. The last study that we have had, it's kind of outdated, which established the economic cost of climate change in Tanzania. So this is the message that really I want to pass on, that it is really crucial to have the numbers of the economic consequences of the climate change. And I think once it is known or indicated, it will really stimulate even in the planning process and how we allocate resources. Even the effort to really mobilize resources will be different from what is really happening now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another one? The last one, yeah. Was so I'm told.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm Mamko Edward from Zumba University. Mine is a contribution to the notion that while we are talking of the national economy, we actually need to look more on the big population of the Tanzanian. Although, of course, they produce at a small scale, but they are the ones that will cumulatively contribute to the GDP. And through the presentation and the discussion that has been here around, I didn't realize anywhere where the community, especially the small producers, the agricultural producers, how can they get access to whatever adaptation and mitigation and maybe just small solutions that can assist them while they are struggling with the effects that are related with the climate change, especially those emergencies, like, for example, the outbreak of diseases and pests, which we know the climate change actually is causing kind of havoc now, especially for the outbreak of diseases and the pests that affect their crops and even their stocks. Then maybe while we are discussing a lot of adaptations, and maybe at higher levels, but I think we need also to consider the way they can receive or they can get the access of the information so that they can respond correctly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The two last interventions are quite interesting in the sense that they bring to the fore, I think, the whole issue of how do you mainstream climate change in the national economic outlook and budget. Our budgeting system is sectoral, sector-based, and as such, environment is perceived as a sector rather than a cross, an issue that affects all sectors, such that when I am as a Minister of Transport and Communication, the issue of environment is so peripheral to me that it's not even reflected in my budget. And here we are saying that we have to mainstream environment in the economy. I think I would like to hear from Professor Sambichaka. Do you have any, this has intrigued me, I'm saying from practice. Yeah, I had a small budget compared to the needs of the sector, but nobody cared about environment because everybody protects his own little empire, as it were, and then we have to mainstream environment in the national budget. I think can you please say something about this? I mean, maybe you have some ideas that we can implement or that are implemented to achieve what we want.
Yeah, I think, but what I wanted to say before I go into those details is that I'm not very sure how far the society, the community, is aware about environment. I'm not very sure because I think Eric Mugurusi is here. They gave me an assignment that is almost 15 years back to review the 10-year Rio Summit. What do Tanzanians understand about Rio Summit? And even before the Joburg meeting, they give, the United Nations Capital Development Fund told me to go around for Eastern and Southern Africa, see how prepared are they about the meeting, the summit. Now, I'll not probably answer the question, but what I'm trying to say is that there is a problem. I mean, the weight, because the environment cuts across. You can't avoid the environment. Environment cuts across all sectors, and you need it. And if you want to improve your economy, you have to do something with the environment. If you ignore environment, you ignore yourself. You see, there is an advert here. I don't know if everybody read it. It's just behind me. Nitunze, nikutunze. I hope there is also a song out of that. Yeah. Or what I would say, yes, it can be done. We can conduct research, but there isn't, even the research itself, if you Google, research which has been done by Tanzanians, there are very few. A good many research would be UNDP and these Scandinavian countries, and probably he's a center. But we need to invest more in environmental studies. And as I said, adaptation, we're told, is very expensive. Where to get those funds, we don't know. Probably our partners can support us. But it is an expensive undertaking to prevent of course, we are talking about wind and solar and geothermal, all that. But is that cheap? Not cheap. So, but we got to know environment. What is it? When I went round, I was given several definitions of environment. And there is some homework. I think Professor Ajage from University said we need to undertake training or teaching right from the beginning, probably from primary school, secondary school, to university about environment, so that people are aware, they are sensitive, they are ready to invest or even to give a budget which can do something. And at the end of it, we have a better Tanzanian environment for ourselves and for future generations. That's all what I can say, Professor Moderator. I did not answer your question, but probably this is what I wanted to say, because I thought this is an opportunity for me to vent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Msambichaka. I would like to bring this discussion to a conclusion, and may I leave you with a few thoughts. One is, again, to think hard on what the implementation of mainstreaming climate change or environment in the national economy. I think is something that we need to really work on. It may involve the issue of climate resilience assessment in all our policies, not only the environment policy, but all policies. How is the environment mainstreamed in all policies? Maybe then we can go from there to a national economic policy and then a national budget. But otherwise, I see my colleague or my young brother Makamba will be really working hard, but there won't be anything to be seen. But they're trying very hard, I think. I know I've been in that position. Another issue is the issue of infrastructure. It came out in Professor Msambichaka's introductory remarks. I think for engineers who are here, or representatives of the engineering societies or associations, what we must now look into whether our standards for infrastructure really are climate resilient, in the sense that, as you can see in Dar es Salaam, as soon as it rains, you have potholes on a newly constructed roads. It means we didn't factor in the issue of climate variability in our standards, or we go for the cheap, which is not a way to be climate sensitive. Or I think it's a very important issue that perhaps we need to go. It may be expensive, but again, it's better to pay for expensive now, infrastructure now, rather than to build new infrastructure later, because our standards were not climate resilient. Another issue that I wish to leave with you for your thoughts is, I mentioned the issue of insurance. How does insurance relate to climate vulnerability, particularly in the agricultural sector, and also in the housing sector? And So we need to look into that issue. Later on, I think during the afternoon, maybe we should be exploring other new novel methods of bilateral cooperation that we can evolve, that can go towards assisting climate adaptation. I've also talked about the identification and assessment and assimilation of indigenous knowledge in adaptation, but also the issue of public education, the use of the media, particularly the radio and the handset now that we have is, you know, the use of the internet, the use of social media for, you know, in all the issues that we're discussing, in order that we can reach the people that one of the speakers said in the villages or outside towns. But they all now have the telephone. I mean, they have their mobile phone, and that is an interesting thing that, you know, adaptation of new technologies, ICT technologies in environmental issues. I think that is a challenge that perhaps you may wish to respond to in the afternoon. But finally, the global issue this week at a global level is about public waste, is about plastic waste. I think nobody has talked about it this morning, and may I just draw the attention of His Excellency the Minister that when I sit on this chair this afternoon, I'll bring him on the spot on the issue of plastics. Finally.
Hopefully, finally.
Hopefully, finally. Just to share with you this interlinkage, but which does not come very clear in sectors, or exploitation of sectoral linkages, is the issue of between environment and other sectors, is the issue of the Dar es Salaam rapid transit buses. Most of you are not aware. I'm aware because I was there at that time. When the issue was brought to me as Minister for Transport, we were looking for funds to implement the idea that we should modernize our transport system here in Dar es Salaam. The issue that we pursued was not from the transport side. It was from the environment side. And that's how we got the money to fund the project from the World Bank. We said, well, we can abate all these emissions from all these small vehicles and taxis and everything by bringing in larger buses to carry more people. And we even calculated how much we could abate in terms of carbon dioxide. And that's how we got the money from the World Bank to start with. So it wasn't a transport project. It was an environment project. But now people have forgotten. But it was interesting. Yeah, when it was brought to me, yes, that is how we processed it as a Minister of Transport, but as a project from environment. Maybe it was because of my interest in environment to start with. I thought that is. I should say that, as you can see, when you grow old, you have old stories to tell. A quote Final quote.
Final.
We're talking about change, and we're talking about adaptation. It should remind us of an important quote by Darwin, famous scientist, Charles Darwin. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, a hand for our panelists. I thank you, moderator. I thank you, panelists, for the lively discussion. And this is the final announcement that I'm going to make. We are now going to lunch. Please be back here, for those who are not fasting, please be back here at 2:34 and 60 seconds. That's when we'll be starting our next session. It's going to be a lively one, and then followed by the ministerial high-level symposium according to the PS engineer Kalongo, who said that it's a real high-level symposium, even though the minister Makamba thought differently. But when you have ministers only discussing, and that should be very interesting. And then I don't know whether there'll be a Q&A, but we'll see. There will be a Q&A. Yes, this is where we can hold them accountable at that time. So you should come in to hold them accountable. So this session, for those who are having lunch, enjoy your lunch, and let's be back on time. And thank you very much once again. A hand for the panel. Thank you.